Good evening, everyone. As a member of the Academy of Art, I'm very proud to have you as guests tonight, Maia Morgenstern, Erik Marquardt, Yvan Sagnet, and Elia Rediger. Also, on a more personal level, I really have to say that I admire your work, all of you, and I'm very curious to hear more about your experiences, your work, your ideas. My name is Georg Seeßlen. I'm a critic and a writer. Therefore, I'm far from being a professional host, and also I'm far from speaking very eloquent English. So, nevertheless, I hope I get by with a little help from my wonderful guests. And I borrow the motto of Elia Rediger's election campaign: courage, chaos, and coolness. I think we'll have a little of that today. We just saw the film The New Gospel, in which you, Maya, and you, Yvan, played very important parts, much more than being only actress or actor. For me, the film is not only a real masterpiece of Milo Rau, it's also an example for working together, creating together, reflecting together. I'm describing this film as kind of layer cake, where you can, of course, discuss every layer, documents and social struggles, for instance, film history, Christian mythology, a theater that uses a whole city as a stage, methods of representation and reenactment, and so on. But the art of the cake, the flavor, the taste, comes from balancing all these elements. And it stems from two main impulses: the impulse to create art and the impulse to empower social and political activism. And that's what we may discuss in, I hope, a lively debate. So by presenting you, I try already to begin this debate, posing a question or two concerning our aim, the finding and the founding of a school of resistance. Maia Morgenstern, describing you as a prolific and respected actress both in theater and film in Romania and, of course, also in international productions would be sheer understatement, I think. You are a creative force knowing the beauties and the troubles of visual representation from many different angles. You worked with Marta Mescherosch, Theo Angelopoulos, Hans Steinbichler, and of course Milo Rau, just to mention a few. And you took part in the campaign against open pit mining at Rocha Montagna, I hope I pronounce it right, which threatens man and nature. And that was in 2012, I think, already an example for connection of cinema and activism. Maybe we can come back to this long-lasting struggle later on. Our first interest, however, is of course the role you played in the New Gospel project, the role of Mary, Mother of Jesus, which you already performed in a very different film, Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. For me, growing up in a Catholic surrounding, pictures, sculptures, and other representations of Saint Mary were omnipresent, ranging from the symbol of purity and innocence to the symbol of motherhood and shelter. At the moment, here we witness a feminist movement within the Catholic Church under the name of Maria 2.0, Mary 2.0, demanding not only more female influence, but also a certain rewriting or a new interpretation of Christian mythology. So my question is whether you would subscribe to a political interpretation of that figure, maybe as a female part of a revolution. And second question, what is for you the connection between the interpretation of a character or a situation on stage and on film, and on the other hand, political activity in practice on the other hand? So it's up to you.
Let's go with the first question. Actually, what would you like me to tell you about the connection between theater or film? And I'd like you to be much more precise, and I would like to understand exactly the question. What do you mean? What do you want to know?
Well, let's be more precise. Okay, I tried. At least I try. I think an interpretation of a given figure on stage or on film is uh, already a political statement, you know, and as a political statement, maybe it is not only working on stage as art, but it's also um, has its impact in the political world. So my question was if you do that by on purpose to interpretation and then activism.
Well, I wouldn't say I do it on purpose because, first of all, you have to know that I have a sort of fear. I'm a little bit of frightened about and of the word politics. What is politics? To escape quickly, uh, to run away from this issue and from this question, I would say no, I'm not in politics. I don't want to be in the politics. I have nothing to do with politics. It's not me politics. I don't understand politics. They say one thing, they do another. I don't know which is left and which is right, and where it goes and where it comes and where are the promises and what is the reality. No, I'm not in the politics because it's a sort of disappointment, a sort of fear, a sort of no, that's not me. I'm in my art. In what is my art? I'm trying to make some characters alive, to bring some ideas, some feelings. The conclusions are yours, but as you ask me, that's why I kindly ask you to say again the question, because I have to admit, I have to face it. Yes, it is. It is a sort of new definition of politics and what a character, a story could bring to social life, to our life. What the conclusions and your feelings and what you understand from a movie, from a theater play, that could be the politics. But I'm still afraid to admit that I'm doing politics.
See, I'm very happy to understand the let's say the artistic strategy of your profession. So I'm content with that. So Yvan Sagnet, to switch to you. Your work as an activist started when you experienced the really inhumane treatment of tomato pickers in the south of Italy at Masseria Boncuri, a farming unit near Salento. You organized protest campaigns that eventually led to better regulations of the working conditions. But as important as this local fight against the exploitation and the rightlessness was revealing to the public what is going on in the tomato fields and orange picking and lots of more. Slave-like work, the denial of medical care and proper housing. And all that just to make food cheaper for the supermarkets and generate profit to landowners and their collaborators.
We have a little freezing problem here with Yvan. We have a freeze.
Oh yes, I see. What do we do?
Maybe a little question for...
Yeah, you can ask me a question. Erik? I'm not freezed.
Oh. So I'm going to introduce Erik Marquardt and of course Ilya Rediger and turn back to Yvan later. Is that correct?
I think that's a good idea.
Yes.
Okay, then I switch to Erik Marquardt. As a photojournalist, you're of course always confronted with the connections between the aesthetic, the moral, and the political aspects of representation. What do we show? How do we show it? What's the purpose of showing it, and so on? You followed the routes of fugitives and made us understand the suffering and the fear and the too often destroyed hopes of people in search for a life without terror, war, and hunger. But you didn't restrict yourself to documentation. You always were also involved in practical solidarity. And for instance, in the rescue action CI, you could save and help a lot of people in risk of their lives. Our democratic civil society owe a lot to people like you and organizations like CI. You all can take that as a donation appeal, if you like. On the other hand, you are also a politician, member of the ecologist party Bündnis 90 Die Grünen, and a member of the European Parliament. These are 2 or even 3 worlds you are acting in, and of course, I'm curious to learn something about the connections and maybe contradictions between them. As we are talking about the school of resistance, my questions are: is there a chance for resistance against inhumane treatment of migrants, seeing them being pushed back, imprisoned in camps without supply and without humanely conditions of living, and then forced to caporalato, slavery? Is there a chance of fundamental change within the party or within the political institution you work with?
Yeah, of course there is a chance for improvement. So I have to say yes, because otherwise I'm in the wrong job, you know. Like if I would say no, there's no chance, I can stop working actually as a politician. That's why I have to say yes, of course. And I think what Maia said is very interesting, that the view of, I would say, society on politicians or parliaments is always a little bit like, oh, they say one thing and then they do the other things. But in general, I think that's also maybe the connection between art or photography and politics. So if you do art, for example, if you're a filmmaker, you have to somehow present the result. So you cannot just make this nice event here without a film, actually. So people can see the film, but in politics, you're always like, oh, I propose something, that's my idea, and then maybe people share my opinion, but you never have to present the result, actually. Therefore, you need art and journalism and filmmakers to present the results of politics. And to connect these two spheres somehow, that's what I find also interesting in the political world. So to try to not just say who we are, but to try to show who we are by actions. And that's not always very easy because, as we know, politics is hard and you need majorities for something. And I think, to not make it so long, that's also a question of how to connect art and journalism and politics to get an overview about the reality that I think people start thinking about how do we want to live together. And that would be a nice chance to make people think.
Okay, we are returning to this chance later on, I hope. And I switch to Elia Rediger. Is it correct, the
Perfect.
pronunciation? Perfect. Okay. You're not only a musician in various genres and projects, but also run for mayor in Basel 2012 and developed therefore a grassroots democratic election song with the motto I mentioned before of your campaign, courage, chaos, and coolness. So I translated for myself from to Swiss. I think this was a perfect mixture of art and activism because it was not, I think so, because it was not meant as an ironic statement like once was the run of Frank Zappa for president of the United States. But courage, chaos, and coolness would fit for him too, I think.
Yeah.
One, yeah, one of your works is the oratorio Hercules of Lubumbashi, which dealt with the politics of the Swiss mining company Glencore in the Republic of Congo, being the biggest group for commodity trading in the world. Maybe you could tell us something about the reactions and what came out of the public discussion. And that, of course, leads us to the role of music and the connection between art and activism. Is it just a mode of transport for verbal discourses? Or do you think it's also a language of its own? Is there a sound of resistance? And how does your music work in the new gospel? A lot of questions.
Yeah, but I
Maybe
mean,
you choose some.
it's a surprising pick that you choose with my running for mayor in Basel, in my hometown in Switzerland, because it was actually the starting point of seeing my actionism in a musical way. So it was a very important moment for me to do that and not to put it in an ironic frame, not to be the Zappa clown, because I think that was his destiny. That was very tragic for him when he was dealing very political with issues, and to make the frame open to the oratorio we did in southern of Congo. The sound of resistance is a very brutal sound sometimes, but it's a very beautiful sound, and it's a wide range of frequencies, and but it's fearless. And it's fearless, and I think that's very interesting when you deal with different countries, different languages, with all these frequencies that you have in film and music, and in narration, and text, and poetic, in any way of the poetic narrative. You feel you can feel a fearlessness of resistance when you deal with sound and when you deal with this spectrum of art. So also for the new gospel, we were aiming at the most political music possible, and to have always that cut between the politic side of why we do it in the spectrum of the layers of how we are telling the story, of how Milo was telling the story. And I was happy to be involved very early in the cut. So that was very interesting to be discussing that at the early stage. How do we counterpoint? It was a very musical process of cutting the movie, I thought, of how to counterpoint the storytelling with a layer that does not contradict and does not underlay it with a sort of irony. So we didn't want irony, as you said. I did not want irony. We wanted the full spectrum, what music can do. And but some strong ideas already Milo had of how the function of that could be. The big scene at the end, of course, on the cross and everything. So yeah, it was. To do Sound of Resistance is a very political act, I feel, and there is still resistance to the resistance of that sound. So I'm still pushing people to go with me that direction when it comes to sound, because as soon as you're just dealing with sound, irony is never far. And I am feeling like there is action in the game. I think in Ghent we wrote a hymn together, for example, about that for the new European sort of actions, and I think that the hymns, the songs for the actions, I think that's a very interesting topic for the future also.
Like hearing music in my head and hearing struggling music, struggling concepts. Also, as the concept of Maya and the concept of you, they're a little bit different, I think, because it's another notion to how we get to the real action or to the real movement. Okay, now I hope Yvan can hear us. Could you hear? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Okay. So as I was telling about the struggle against the what is called the capo relato. This is a system of I think new kind of slavery in our world, and it exists not only in the South, but also admits in Germany. For me, this capo relato is the biggest crime of our century, and it consists not only of individual brutality, but it's systematic. There is a whole economy grounded on slave-like work and deprivation, and we all, by filling our shopping carts, are part of it. And knowing, as living in Italy sometimes, who is behind those structures, we can just imagine how brave you and your fellow activists had to be and still have to be to resist. That more and more people are aware of that situation and are demanding changes, for instance, by controlling labor conditions, by neutral organizations instead of unreliable means of self-control, has a lot to do with your work and also your books, such as Ama il tuo sogno, Vita e rivolta nella terra del rosso, Life and Revolt in the Land of the Red Gold, that urgently need to be translated also in German. Now, the next step for you was to become an actor in the new gospel. So my first question to you is, what are your hopes for a new pact between art and activism both on a personal basis and then in a broader sense as a strategy for tomorrow's struggles.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for your question. And before replying directly to your question, I would like to tell people who are saying that slavery didn't exist, that slavery does not only mean to not enjoy freedom and liberty, to move around and be free from shackles and chains, but modern-day slavery is also another type of deprivation of liberty and freedom. It's also a lack of capacity of exerting an influence, of making an influence by people who feel that they are in a state of weakness and they are abused of by being deprived of their freedom in legal terms, in political terms, and they are exploited economically and socially. So modern-day slavery does exist. And 4 centuries ago, slaves were sold to the big bosses. But today, they're also working for agriculture in the fields. And in inverted commas, if you will, these slaves are today sold. They are immigrants, but not only, but they are also offered as low-cost, cheap labor forces to multinational corporations. So recruiting persons, hiring people at low cost is also correlated to slavery, and this is what we find today. So slavery still exists. Slaves do walk around seemingly freely, but they're still exploited. And there is a link between exploitation of 4 centuries ago and exploitation today. And persons are still in the midst of all of that and losing all of their personal dignity, which is severely affected. Dignity is what is most affected by modern-day slavery, because slaves today lack the most essential slavery. 4 centuries ago was the same as it is today. And you find slavery in all sorts of different countries, not only in Italy, but all across Europe, in Germany, in Spain, in the south of France, in Greece, in Romania. This was what I was going to specify because it's important. You raised a question and asked me how art and activism is linked. And I think these 2 elements belong together, and they cannot be dissociated from one another. They are symmetrical to some sort, if you will, because art brings about activism by way of being art. And being an activist also creates art, because if you are an activist, you have to know how to enter into a dialogue, you have to know how to speak, how to communicate, how to give rise to emotions in persons, inspire persons with emotion. So for me, there's an intrinsic link between those 2 elements, between art and activism. But the difference can be, or difference being that we have to ask ourselves how they are calibrated, how they are balanced. Is there such thing as pure art? Is it always linked with activism? But I think they go together, as I told you. And the film with Milo Rau, The New Gospel, well, I was not afraid of taking part in this film, even if I wasn't a professional actor, but I did know that I could find my place here in art. And this film was a success, I believe, when it comes to raising awareness, to make people understand about the message that we were going to convey, about the situation of migrants, of workers in general, the situation of exploitation. the situation created by the caporali. And I was going to convey and bring across all these messages using traditional art, which is there, and cinema. And if I had been an actor, maybe the angle would have been different. But my objective here was to achieve that art and activism can, if you will, be more professionalized in their way of working together in order to bring about an even more excellent product in the end.
So it's interesting. We have 4 people working together, and 4 very different opinions about the being very close, activism and art, or being more distanced. If I'm getting it right, there is a history, a whole history of coming together of political action and art, and it's very strange because it's always starting with idealistic and enthusiastic people going together to fight in the streets, and then it dissolves again. In my life, I've experienced at least 4 movements which brought together art and politics, and then it dissolved again. For instance, it began with the hippie revolution, then came punk, and then came the more serious notion of socialized and democratized art, and it always had this point where we have to part again. So, in your opinion, what can we do to get a better basic for this cooperation, for this alliance, without coming together and then going parting again? I don't know who wants to answer this question. Maybe all of you. Please go ahead.
Well,
Maia?
I'm not very sure if I understood correctly or entirely all the meanings of your question and all the levels of your question. But for me, by one hand, is the fact that, in my opinion, in my thoughts, in my experience, or I don't know how to put it, the idea is that being involved in politics has something to do, maybe I'm wrong, you will tell me, has something to do with the idea is definitely I'm wrong, I'm right, and you, the opposite, you are wrong. My politics is good, my party is good, my side is the good one, the right one. It's only me that is right, and I'm right, and the truth is by my side, and you are the wrong one, the enemy, the bad one. In my art, in my job, in my métier, in my theater, in the stories I'm telling, making a film or making a theater play, or even writing my stories about my youth or my childhood, the interesting part is always the dark one, the bad guy. Because it's a story, and in my art, theater or film, I don't know, we need a conflict. So somebody has to be the good one. Somebody has to be the bad one. And you as actor, or I don't know, a person involved in storytelling, you have to take part and to be the attorney of even the good one. It's understandable, but you also have to understand, to be attorney for the dark side of your story. Speaking of theater or film, or I don't know, your stories, and this is for me, it's interesting and important because I have to dig deep, and special the dark characters, the bad ones. I think we have to judge or to consider or to wait very, very carefully. And first of all, to understand the reasons and the motivation, why it's like this and how it goes, and how it happened that all the way back, a character, a situation, and conflict turned till our moment, the moment we are telling the story, the theater play, the film. Or when I had to defend, and I would underline this word, when I had to defend Mel Gibson, The Passion of Christ, a lot of people, that's why I'm so frightened, I'm so afraid of press conferences like this, because all the journalists blamed me. It's 100 years ago, as we all know. It's 18 and 19, 100 years ago. But all the journalists, most of them blamed me. Why did you perform in that film? So I put my
I'm
conviction
not in this business. No, you don't have to be afraid. I'm not mentioning Mel Gibson anymore. No, but I think I really understand your point of view, because I think also, like you, there are two codes, a political code and an artistic code. They are not the same. Um, and like you said, what a politician have to do reminds me of what Carl Schmitt once said, that politics means divide between friends and enemies. This is his definition of politics. But maybe um, we don't have to stick to this conservative definition of politics. Maybe a little art, like thinking yourself into the mind of the aggressor, or the other, may help us a little bit. So the question maybe is for Erik, because you in are in a party and in an institution. What is different from being part of a social movement? Because in a party and in an institution, there are rules, there are rights, there are regulations, and you have to stick to them. So um, do you think that politics is, like Carl Schmitt says, enemies here, friends, we and the others? Or has it developed into soft skills, maybe, or to understanding more? What do you think about?
Yeah, I don't think that Carl Schmitt was right when he just said that politics is to define something. I don't like to just define what I think, who is the enemy, who is a friend, and then I go home and that's my job or what. Like I think that politics has to be about change, and maybe you need some definitions for friends and enemies, and of course. Sometimes you have the feeling that many people come to politics, maybe in a parliament, and trying to change the world, and after a few years they just want to change the rules of procedure in the parliament or whatever. But in general, I would say you said in your beginning statement that society owes people like me something or whatever because we are like did something or whatever. I don't think that's right. I actually would say that if we talk about art and activism and politics, everything is about responsibility, and the starting point is that society owes society something. Because like if we just define some enemies and friends and understand who is maybe the wrong opinion or whatever, we have to have somebody who feels responsible for changing it. And the difference between art, which maybe can show reality or make people think, and activism, which maybe can increase pressure on politics, and politics, which can really change policies and stuff, and maybe do some law enforcement, is that there are different responsibilities. And that does not mean that you cannot work together and that it's not interlinked somehow, but to feel the responsibility and not to say, oh, I'm society, politics has to change it, and I'm art, no, activism has to change it. I'm not the activist because I'm a good artist or whatever, does not help so much because you don't define your special responsibility. And if your first question to Maia or all of us, I like the question because it was about cooperation, like how to increase cooperation in the daily business, especially when it comes to left-wing movements. You have many people who are trying to join a movement for changing the world, and after some weeks they are just trying to change the movement somehow. And I think that cooperation, and also what Maia said, to understand different points of view, different perspectives, and to understand that it's about engagement and trying to reach more people, to convince people, especially the people who do not have your opinion yet. That is somehow, I think, a way of doing better cooperation. Especially in the last months, I had the feeling that some of the debates we had in, of course, in Germany, for example, focused a little bit too much on the differences between each other and not on the ways to engage and find more cooperation and discuss things and understand different perspectives. Yeah.
So for the moment being, we have three models, I think. First, there's a model of cooperation. One side goes together with the other side for to achieve something, to make something happen, to make something possible. The second position is that we have to learn from each other. The activists learn from the artists learn from the activists. But when I understand Yvan, he has a third model to offer, that you have to become an artist if you are an activist, and you have to become an activist if you are an artist. So these three models, I think, it's very interesting, mingle together. Some of us prefer the one, some of us prefer the other. So we have one fourth notion. Elia, what is your opinion? what model would you choose?
I maybe have to step just a small step back from the three models, because I always think it's a question of to change. I'm going with Erik on the change, that the last 5 meters of changing a habit till something changes in a society is always a very, very crucial way that activism and the movement can succeed in doing anything. So you always have these last 5 meters that are very crucial. And of course, art and this whole Dionysus way of representing a piece and showing something is, of course, always a big act in being part in that cultural tradition, that this is refreshed over and over of time. And of course, I'm very luxury. My luxury is that music doesn't die. So even the movement dies, the music comes back. So movements come back. You can always sing Bella Ciao at any time. So I think ritual is a big ritual is a big answer for that. The art can give rituals for a society, and that leads to consequences that change a habit in a society, in economics, in politics, and everything. So I think we can help as active people to do rituals, exactly. And yeah, so there is a public question coming in that I was told to say, or who says that? Hey, Yvan, what was the concrete benefit of working with Mr. Rao and IIPM for NoCap, as well as for the wider political debate and action surrounding the Italian agricultural industry and ethical consumerism?
Yes, there are a couple of benefits that can be broken down in different categories. So first of all, thanks to Milo Rao, I was able to bring across my message by way of using art, by way of resorting to cinema, by way of resorting to theatre representation. So this was a new model that I was able to discover thanks to Milo Rao, and it was very efficient, just like other models. And my objective, my aim always is to reach out with my activism towards others, to have that policy of reaching out to others. And NoCap is supposed to sensitize consumers at the European level at large. So when you go and buy tomatoes at the supermarket, you always have to ask yourself questions about the tomato that you are going to buy. Where does it come from? Who helped to grow it? What about the system? Was it a slavery system? What about the workers? So these are all sorts of questions you have to ask yourself. And thanks to Milo Rao, we succeeded in bringing this across for our movement. So it was all about raising this awareness across the European population about the modern-day consumer models, and about the fact of no longer being indifferent towards what is surrounding us. So it's all about solidarity as a very strong and powerful act that helps us to overcome injustice. So thanks to Milo Rao, we can push forward this battle, this very wide and comprehensive struggle comprising so many different topics and issues, ranging from local aspects towards the struggle against the capitalist system exploiting persons, producing slaves. And we would like to bring this to the awareness of the European people, of the European consumers. We are all consumers because we have to eat and drink all the time. And it's just this fact of having reached out to this part of the population that considers itself to be religious. And religion is not just the habit of going to the mass, but it's about practicing in real life what is written in the Holy Scripture. And this is why Milo called this the new gospel, because today, if Jesus Christ, who died 2,000 years ago, if he were in our midst today, who would he be with today? Would he be on the sides of the rich or the poor? Would he be on the sides of Yvan Sagnet or the exploiters? So just like 2,000 years ago, he would be in the midst of immigrants. He would tell them the same message that I'm telling you today. He'd be an activist, just like I am today. And with the help of art, with his approach, Milo Rau had the capacity to translate this approach into art, to make an influence on persons, to join up in that struggle. He did that in the Congo, and he does that in Italy. And I'd like to just pick up on the question posed by our moderator just before, focusing on the link between art, activism, and politics. I said that there is a correlation between two or three things, even with politics. Let's take the case of Milo Rau here. Milo Rau is an artist, but he's also an activist, and it's thanks to his art that he can convey a message, and he becomes an activist thanks to art. And Maia Morgenstern does the same thing. She's an actress, but she is pursuing politics as well. In 2012, she did so. So each and every one of us does politics. I mean, it depends on the definition we have of that concept. I mean, with politics, you have the opportunity to make an influence, to influence people. But from the moment on when you make a choice of buying something or not buying something, you express yourself in a political act. You carry out a political act. This is just an example. So there's so many actors that have become politicians. Let's take the case of Pepe Grillo, the founding father of the Five-Star Movement in Italy. He's now a politician on the head of a political party. Reagan was also an actor becoming a politician, because thanks to the arts, those people are able to influence the masses. So there is a correlation between two or even three aspects between art, activism, and politics.
Well, that leads me to another player in this game. If you have art on the one hand, activism on the other hand, as you mentioned, a lot of people who are actors going to politics. I think also it's possible the other way around, because if you're in politics, you have to be an actor. But you have, yeah, you're perfectly right. But
Yeah,
you have
absolutely.
this third player, I would call the mass media. And also in the film, we see a little of this triangle: art, activism, and mass media. And I would like, first of all, for Yvan, put up the question: could mass media be another cooperator, or is it more of a problem? Because they are always searching for scandals, for spectacles, and then they go away with all their cameras and their equipment. Did you experience mass media as a friendly force or as a problem?
Well, I believe that mass media is a double-bladed weapon. mass media can be oriented positively, but also who can have a negative stance, and it always depends on the objective of the persons behind it. And of course, also the taste of the time is something that plays a role. Of course, content is a value, but for me, it all depends on good and decent communication. And if the mass media make use of their capacity to reach out to a big number of people, they can also use their communication to spread out negative messages, and then communication can be problematic. And for years now, communication has changed towards the negative, I would say. So communication was often used by persons, owners of that process, and you have to be quite blunt about it, quite frank and open-minded about it, because mass media in the hands of big corporations, and behind them you'll find persons, management boards that have their own values, that have their own ideas and notions. And whatever they decide helps to also influence information provided, and it's inspired about what they think about it's inspired by their own mindset. So communication very often doesn't reflect the truth or the pragmatic way of seeing things. We've got right-wing media, for instance, but also left-wing media on the other hand. But for me, media would have to actually choose a mode of communication reflecting truth above all. Communication that is passed on needs to help educate people. I'd like to take the example of social networks, social media such as Twitter, Facebook, where you can find all sorts of different things. It is not filtered in any way. People resort to it and use it in order to spread out political messages, and the same goes for traditional communication as well, for radio and television. For me, it's the same thing. It's the same story. I am not against the media, mind you, because it's important to inform people. But I am quite skeptical about their content, about the content that the media bring across.
I may pass a question to Erik, because we have always this ambiguity or ambivalence Yvan was talking about. So we really don't know, is the media controlled in a democratic way, or is it controlled in a capitalist way? And what is your opinion? How could we approve the role of media? Because I think for the moment being, it is not very optimistic to see what is happening with the mass media. So is there a second struggle also in this shadow empire of mass media?
So I would not generally say that media is controlled somehow by someone or something, but of course, we have a situation where mass media cannot just tell the truth in general, because it's also the truth that tomatoes are very delicious and very healthy. And you can make a big report about healthy and delicious tomatoes, maybe show how you eat tomatoes, but you can also show how they are produced. And both would be the truth somehow. But it's also about representation. And what we see in the last year, for example, and I would not say that it's wrong to make reports about the corona crisis, but of course that leads to a situation where you don't have reports about many other things and many other crimes. And in times of social media and mass media companies struggling to find more clicks in general and not like being very like investing not so much maybe anymore in intensive investigations, but in headline producers who just assume that there is something whatever, yeah, like you know what I mean. You have the problem that there are not enough people to really put the finger in the problems of the world at the moment, because it's not that easy to travel at the moment. It's not that easy to find enough money to travel for 4 weeks to southern Italy to find time and money for a nice report for the Tagesschau about the working conditions in southern Italy. It's very easy to create a big headline of something. So that's one point. And the other point is that mass media in the circumstances we have at the moment creates a situation where politicians do not try to find the best solutions or the interesting discussions about how to change society or whatever. We have a situation where politicians, basically most of the politicians, I would say, when they give interviews or making press releases or writing their programs, trying to reduce risks of having a campaign of the Bild Zeitung in Germany against, I don't know, whatever, like my party, for example, or other parties. It's not especially against my party, the Bild Zeitung or whatever. But if we, for example, or let's say the left party trying to find a solution to invest in green energy, then you can be basically sure that the Bild Zeitung will not say, oh, they are so smart, they find new ways for green energy. They will say, oh, maybe they will steal your electricity, and maybe you have to live like in the Central Age, like 500 years ago, because now we don't have electricity anymore if you elect these politicians or whatever. And that's also like the second part of my answer, that it's very, I'm fine, yeah, but it's very hard to bring messages just with the right explanation, and sometimes problems are not like one sentence problems or one sentence answers or whatever, with right explanations to the public by using mass media, because in general you have just 1 or 2 sentences in the articles. That's a third thing. And then second thing, and the third thing is that I would say social media is somehow very interesting for politicians, because they are not necessarily dependent on mass media anymore. They can just say what they want, and they of course have opinions, and not only making reports, but they can directly address the public with their opinions by using social media. That's on the one hand interesting for politicians, but it does not create a better or worse society in general, just with the fact that it's interesting and that politicians can use social media very well, I would say. It just creates a new sphere of media, and that should be somehow also politically discussed, how to regulate this new sphere somehow, because as we see in the US, for example, social media, also the mass media, that creates big problems where you don't have one society, but basically at least 2 societies or many bubbles who just inform themselves with their own opinions, and they do not interact with each other anymore, because you can basically, just having very exclusive discussion bubbles and not having integrative discussions as we had with mass media maybe 10 years ago.
This leads us to the function of criticism and the function of theory. We are at the moment we are dealing with doing a film together, doing theater together, doing art together, but you always have this kind of theory. If you are trying to stabilize this mingling of art and activism, and so my question is, how much theory do we need to bring us together? Because we have a lot of different notions and different aspects. Do you think we have to develop a new theory of mingling art and activism? Maybe begin with you.
Yes, Georg, this is Kasia, one of the curators of School of Resistance.
Yes.
Hi. I will take over now because this is a very interesting question for us as curators of the School of Resistance. And thank you, first of all, for moderating and hosting this talk. And thank you for all participating in this conversation. Milo, the new theory of change, as I understood correctly. After 5 days of School of Resistance, I'm wondering, how do you feel about the process of the last days? Your main work being situated in a discourse context that ranges from art to activism and maybe its connection. What are your feelings?
Yeah, thank you, Kasia, and also Martin and everybody. But first of all, thank you, Georg, again, because you were our guest in the very first discussion, and now the moderator in the very last one of this edition of the School of Resistance, landing in Berlin. Thank you so much, Maia. I hope we see us very soon again live, here or in Romania or in South Italy or wherever at the festival, I hope. And thank you so much, Yvan. It was a great pleasure to see you on screen. Thank you so much. And of course also Erik and Elia, our guests that are here. We can drink a wine after this. But now
through our masks.
Yeah, it's incredible. Of course with masks.
Jealous.
Bye. Ciao. Thank you so much. What was the feeling of this? Let's say 5 days of being here. Of course, perhaps you know the story, all of you, but you, Kasia, you know it as well as me, as we founded this school together, the Ent and the IIPM in a moment of beginning of the pandemic. So in May 2020, when we actually had to open the Wiener Festwochen with a speech of Caesara, the Antigone, that is behind us here on top of Martin. Perhaps we can show that. And it was impossible. And then we said, okay, let's make it online. Let's make it with a new online format, and that's how we came to this. And actually, it was planned to be once, and then it was planned to be twice, and then it was planned, I think, to be 3 times. And at one moment, like everybody, we understood that there is no possible planning of it, and it continued and continued. And perhaps I can end this with a quote of Yvan Sagnet. I remember when we opened, when we showed the new gospel the first time at the Venice Festival last September. Also another moment when we thought, okay, it restarts, and it was the first and the last film festival. And Yvan said, for you, you are now in cinema. It's these 2 hours, but we struggled until here, and we will fight until the end of our days. And I think that's how we meet here. Everybody has his fight, and everybody who is here, we have a long story with him. We have a long story with Yvan, and we will continue a long story. I have a long story with Maia, and if she wants or not, we will continue. And the same with Georg and with everybody. So this is an online meeting, but from parallel struggles that are at moments united in these in this format of discussion. So I think it was quite beautiful when Erik said you can have beautiful discussions, but you need to have activism and you need to have art, and this can be a meeting point, but not more. And I think that's how I perceive it. It was super inspiring, but I really hope that very soon we can go back to South Italy and we can continue the fight together. I think Kasia, Martin, you can add a lot to this.
Yes, Yvan, I saw you. Did you want to say something? Yes.
Yes,
but shortly, Yvan, I think.
Yes, I would like to pick up on what Milo just said. Well, for us, Milo promoted a campaign for the film, The Revolt of Dignity. The Revolt of Dignity is a continuation after the film. So what I'm saying is that the film is not an end in itself, but it is the beginning of a whole process. So the end of the film will actually give way to the revolt of dignity, a big wave of activism by NoCap, Vito, and other activists that are now fighting on against exploitation of women, of workers, and Milo left us with this heritage in Italy. So we've had all these huge campaigns in the framework of the Revolt of Dignity, because some people thought that the film would just end in Matera and then it would all be done and over with. But the legacy of Milo Rau is something different, to leave behind something after having been there, after having shot the film. So the Revolt of the Dignity that I'm part of is a big, overwhelming movement, and this movement has already brought about something highly positive for immigrants, for farmers, for people that have left their homes. So thanks to Milo's work and thanks to this innovation that he brought about, we were able to now have a bigger house thanks to the church in Matera, the House of Dignity, La Casa della Dignità. And this House of Dignity gives shelter to 50 persons today, persons who used to live in ghettos, persons you got to know in the film. And thanks to Milo Rau, now local produce is sold in Germany and other countries. So this is the power of theatre. This is the power of Milo Rau's work. So it will not just end there. It's not just about having met Maia and Yvan, but we are just hoping to leave a legacy behind.
Thank you, Yvan. And I would like to really say that to the audience again, and not only to support and donate for important sea rescue missions, but also to the mission of NoCap. And you can see and donate and support this Rivolta della Dignità under or I will say it in German, www.dasneueevangelium.de. And there you can support the initiatives of Yvan and Vito and others directly. And now I will give the word to Martin to tell us what comes next in our School of Resistance, or what the School of Resistance is about.
If you want, you can add first the very next step, which will take place this month.
Yes, this month, on the 23rd of March, there will be another episode of School of Resistance, and we will connect it to the question of system change. We are still processing and reflecting on that question, so stay tuned.
Yes, and I would just take the opportunity to make some final remarks and also to thank a lot of people. These days we described the School of Resistance as a global decentralized network of experts of change from different areas, as we heard, artists, activists, people also engaged in politics, researchers from various fields and with different struggles, all producing together a repertoire of strategies of resistance against all kind of things that trigger our indignation. And together we try to define new spaces to create new collectives. The school is perhaps also a place of sharing and listening, of facing our own hypocrisy and finding together new practices, a place of learning and unlearning. And also the school is a hypermobile quasi-object, or as French philosopher Michel Serres would have said, a parasite. As soon as it's being observed, as soon as someone is trying to make use of it, to benefit, to exploit the school itself, it has to disappear. It has to disappear to move somewhere else, and then, also picking on a French philosopher, has to search a new territory, a new place, a new social territory to land again. And so our wish for the months and years to come is to move on, to find new places where we can engage with people on a specific social ground. Particularly Kasia and me, but also Milo, would like to thank the producing institutions of the School of Resistance, namely the IIPM, the NT-Gent and Akademie der Künste Berlin. And also there are a lot of people we would like to thank particularly. For instance, our technical director, Jens Baudisch, our stage designer, Anton Lukas, at the camera, Moritz von Dungan, especially our production manager, Elisa Kalosi, and also the rest of the production team of IIPM. For press and public relations, Yvan Augustin and Tom de Klerk. Design, Nina Wolters. And a special thank also to our colleague Eline Banken, who curates with Kasia together the monthly episodes of the School of Resistance. In representation of the Akademie der Künste Berlin, we would also like to thank all Academy members, Akademiemitglieder, who joined us in the past days, especially Georg Yu, that joined as well the first session and the last session, also Anja Rehmat and Johannes Odenthal from the Akademie der Künste. We would also like to thank all the institutions that shared this live stream: Schauspielhaus Zürich, Siegel Center New York, Théâtre La Colline Paris, L'Arche Éditeur, also Nachtkritik in Germany, and particularly the Schaubühne Berlin. Also some other partners from other fields include Whole Round Theatre Commons, Merve Verlag, and from the NGOs and civil society, European Alternatives, ECCHR, Medico International. And as collaborators and funding institutions, we would also like to thank Allianz Kulturstiftung, Kulturstiftung des Bundes, and the Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung. And especially, we would like to thank all experts of change, the participants in the past 5 days, and you, our dear audience. We see you soon, wherever the School of Resistance will land. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye. When is the next one?